This question gives us the function g of x is x squared minus 5 for x greater than or equal to 0. And the first question we're going to ask is to find the domain and range of that function g. To do that, I want to look at the graph. So I have g of x equals x squared minus 5. But I only want that portion of the graph where x is greater than or equal to 0. So what do we have there? The question is asking for the domain and range. The domain, x values we see only include positive numbers. The x value of 0 is there at 0, negative 5, fine. X value of 1, 1/2, 3/4, 2, 3, 4. So the x values get as low as 0 and they go as high as you want it to go. Right? You see that process. You have an arrow here. So the domain is from 0 to infinity. Again, visualize the number line. Here's 0, it actually includes 0, and then we shade all the way that way. Looking at the range, what are the y values? Again, just kind of play along. Y value of 6.512. The y values go up as high as you'd want them to go if we extend this graph, of course. Right? You pick as high as you want it to go, it'll hit there. But what's the lowest that the y value goes? The lowest the y value goes is down here at negative 5. So the lowest is negative 5, and it goes all the way to infinity. So again, thinking about a graph, negative 5 here, but then it gets as large as you want in the positive direction again. So my range of g is from negative 5 to infinity. Now it asks to explain why the function does have an inverse. And it's because any horizontal line that you can look at hits it in at most one point. So for example, if I draw the horizontal line 2, y equals 2, it intersects right there. The horizontal line y equals negative 4, only 1 point. The horizontal line y equals negative 7, never intersects it, which is okay. You just can't have a horizontal line that intersects in more than 1 point. So since the horizontal lines intersect in at most 1 point, this function will have an inverse. Now, the next thing it asks us to do is to find the inverse. So we're going to find the inverse by switching x and y and solving for y. So what we have currently is we have this function, g of x, is x squared minus 5 for x greater than or equal to 0. I'm going to replace g of x with y equals. If we're doing an inverse, x becomes y becomes x, and then you solve for y. Right, solve for y. So we're going to add 5 to both sides. This subtracts out, so I get x plus 5 is y squared. And then normally speaking, we would take the square root of both sides. And normally speaking, you would need plus or minus. But the reality is we're only going to be allowed to use one of those. And it's the one you're going to want to use. So you think y is plus or minus the square root of x plus 5. But here is the idea. We're only going to use the plus version. Why is that? So that's telling me then that I'm only allowed to use y values that are bigger than 0. Notice the square root of x plus 5 could get as low as 0, but can't get any lower than 0. And here's the reason for that. So I'm going to say f inverse of x is equal to the square root of x plus 5. It's because the domain of f the domain of g, I'm using the wrong letter here. We define this function as g. The domain of g earlier was 0 to infinity, and the range of g was -5 to infinity. Now remember, the whole idea with an inverse is x becomes y becomes x. So if I'm looking at g inverse, right, the domain of g, x values in g have to be the range of g inverse. So the domain of g was 0 to infinity, so the range of g inverse has to be 0 to infinity. So that's the y values cannot be negative, hence I just use the plus, not the plus or minus. The domain of g inverse is the same as the range of g. Again, x becomes y becomes x. So the domain of g inverse is the interval from -5 to infinity. So we can see that. Let's go ahead and graph the original function g. I think it's probably already on Desmos. Together with this thing we're calling g inverse, the square root of x plus 5. So there's g. G inverse, I will just call h for now. I have to give it some kind of a name. And we'll call it the square root of x plus 5. And you'll notice the domain, right? Lowest x value you see is -5, and then the x values get as big as you want them to get. Y value, range, lowest y value you see is 0, and they get as big as you want it to get. Also notice, of course, that these two functions, the purple function, which was g inverse, and the black function, which is g, should be symmetric along the line y equals x. Y equals x should act as a mirror, and it most certainly does.